It was the kind of summer day that shimmered with promise, heat radiating from the concrete, making the air thick and lazy. The scent of chlorine hung sweet and sharp, mingling with the faint perfume of blossoming jasmine from next door. Alex, a landscape designer whose hands were as comfortable shaping soil as they were sketching blueprints, leaned back in a battered poolside chair, a contented sigh escaping her lips. Her small backyard, a labor of love, was a verdant oasis, crowned by a cobalt blue pool that mirrored the intense summer sky. Laughter, bright and unrestrained, erupted from the water as her two nieces, Lily and Chloe, cannonballed into the deep end, sending a crystal spray arcing high into the sun-drenched air. For Alex, the pool wasn't just a luxury. It was a sanctuary, a vibrant hub of joy in a life often cluttered with work and responsibility. She'd installed it 5 years ago, a triumph of savings and meticulous planning, envisioning exactly this: sun-kissed afternoons, the rhythmic splash of water, the unbridled glee of children. It was a testament to her belief that happiness could be cultivated, much like the thriving hydrangeas bordering her patio. But joy, like a wild vine, often tangled with the unexpected. And in Alex's meticulously tended world, the unexpected had a name: Mrs. Albright. Mrs. Albright, who lived in the identical, impeccably manicured house next door, was a woman perpetually draped in pastel cardigans, even in the height of summer, and possessed a gaze that could strip paint from a fence. Her garden, a stark counterpoint to Alex's lush exuberance, was a geometric masterpiece of precisely trimmed boxwoods and not a single errant weed. Every leaf that dared to drift over the shared fence line from Alex's mature maple was, inevitably, returned in a small passive-aggressive pile on Alex's doorstep. Alex had learned to live with it, accepting Mrs. Albright's peculiar brand of territoriality as an unavoidable side effect of home ownership. She was, Alex often joked with friends, the personification of a perfectly pressed napkin, unyielding and just a little bit starched. The first few complaints had been minor, almost laughable. The excessive noise of the wind chimes on a breezy day. The disruption caused by Alex's enthusiastic barbecues. The visual pollution of a particularly vibrant new garden gnome Alex had acquired. Alex, ever the diplomat, had always offered a placating smile, a genuine apology, or a minor adjustment, hoping to soothe the ruffled feathers of her neighborly hawk. She truly believed in being a good neighbor, even to one who seemed to view community as a personal affront. But today, as Lily's gleeful shriek echoed, followed by Chloe's equally enthusiastic splash, something felt different. The spray, more audacious than usual, reached the top of the 6-foot wooden fence that separated their properties. Alex saw it, a brief, glistening arc of water, momentarily dampening the weathered planks on Mrs. Albright's side. She saw Mrs. Albright, too, a fleeting glimpse of a pale face framed by a tightly pulled curtain before it vanished. A familiar tightening began in Alex's stomach. Later that afternoon, after the girls had dried off and were engrossed in board games indoors, a sharp rap echoed on Alex's front door. It wasn't the tentative knock of a delivery person, nor the friendly tap of a visiting friend. It was the insistent, slightly aggressive rap of someone with a purpose. Alex opened the door to find Mrs. Albright standing ramrod straight on her porch, clutching a small laminated notepad and a pen. Her lips were pursed into a thin, bloodless line, and her eyes, usually a placid blue, glittered with an unsettling intensity. "Alex," Mrs. Albright began, her voice a precise, clipped instrument, "we need to discuss the incident." Alex frowned, confused. "Incident, Mrs. Albright? What are you referring to?" "The water, Alex. The excessive, irresponsible amount of water cascading over my fence this afternoon from your pool." She said pool, as if it were a cesspit. "Oh, the splashes," Alex said, a slight relief washing over her. This was manageable. "I apologize, Mrs. Albright. The girls were just having fun. It was a particularly big splash, I admit. It'll dry in minutes, I promise." Mrs. Albright's grip on her notepad tightened. "Dry?" "Alex, you misunderstand. This is not about drying. This is about damage. Irreversible damage." Alex blinked. "Damage? To what? A few drops of water on a wooden fence?" "That fence!" Mrs. Albright declared, gesturing dramatically with her pen towards the unseen boundary, "is a historical landmark in this neighborhood. My father built it with his own 2 hands. It has stood unblemished for 47 years. And now, thanks to your recreational activities, it has been compromised." Alex tried to stifle the incredulous laugh that threatened to escape. "Mrs. Albright, it's a standard wooden fence. It gets rained on. It gets sprinklers hitting it. A little pool water isn't going to compromise it." "Oh, but it will," she retorted, her voice rising in pitch. "The chlorine, the chemicals. They will seep into the wood, cause rot, discoloration, structural integrity issues. My property value, Alex, my property value." Her voice was now a shrill crescendo, echoing slightly in the quiet afternoon. Alex took a deep breath. "Look, Mrs. Albright, I understand your concern, but it was just a few splashes. If you're truly worried, I could offer to reseal your side of the fence, though I genuinely don't think it's necessary," Mrs. Albright scoffed, adjusting her cardigan. "Reseal? This is beyond resealing, Alex. This is a matter of negligence. And frankly, a deliberate act of dampening. I saw those girls. They were aiming." "Aiming?" Alex repeated, her patience starting to fray. "They're 7 and 9. They were playing. Playing or not, the consequences are severe. I've already taken photographs, extensive photographs, documenting the dampness and the potential for future degradation." She patted the notepad, as if it contained damning evidence of an international crime. "I expect compensation, Alex, for the immediate repairs and for the long-term devaluation of my property." Alex stared at her, speechless. "You're talking about suing me over pool water?" "If necessary," Mrs. Albright said, her chin jutting out, a glint of perverse triumph in her eyes. "I have already consulted with my attorney." She turned on her heel, a rigid, determined figure, and marched back across her perfectly manicured lawn, leaving Alex standing dumbfounded on her porch. The conversation haunted Alex through the evening. It was so utterly absurd, so beyond the pale of normal neighborly disputes, that she almost convinced herself it was a bizarre dream. But the tightness in her stomach persisted. She walked out to the fence, examining it from her side. The wood was bone dry, the sun having baked away any trace of the splashes. She peered over, trying to see Mrs. Albright's side. It looked fine, exactly as it always had. A week later, a thick, official-looking envelope arrived in the mail. Alex's hands trembled as she opened it. It was a summons from the Superior Court. Brenda Albright versus Alexandra Vance. Cause of action: property damage, negligence, nuisance. Claimed damages: $5,000 for immediate repair, $25,000 for diminished property value, plus legal fees. Alex felt the blood drain from her face. $5,000 for a few splashes? $25,000 for a fence that wasn't even damaged? This wasn't just absurd, it was an outright attack. Her sanctuary, her little piece of joy, suddenly felt like a battleground. The sheer audacity, the malice, behind such a claim shocked her to her core. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle, the blatant disregard for common sense, the calculated attempt to turn a minor inconvenience into a personal vendetta. She called her friend, Sarah, a no-nonsense paralegal. "Sarah, you are not going to believe this." Sarah listened, punctuated by gasps of disbelief. "She's actually suing you over splashing pool water? Alex, that's insane. Seriously, I've heard it all, but this takes the cake." "What?" Do I do? Alex's voice was thin, laced with a tremor she couldn't control. Do I need a lawyer? This is going to cost a fortune. For something this ridiculous, a lawyer would probably laugh in your face too and then charge you $1,000 just to say, "Don't worry about it," Sarah mused. Look, this sounds like a small claims case or something that'll get thrown out immediately. But you have to respond. You have to show up. Over the next few weeks, Alex's peaceful backyard became less a sanctuary and more a forensic crime scene. She took her own photographs of the fence from every angle at different times of day. She pulled out old property records, proving the fence wasn't a historical landmark, but a standard installation from when the house was built 30 years ago. She even researched the effects of chlorinated water on wood, finding countless articles that stated minor splashing would evaporate, harmlessly far less damaging than typical rain or even prolonged direct sunlight. She printed out scientific papers, weather reports from that day confirming high temperatures and rapid evaporation. She felt like a detective preparing for a major case, when all she was trying to do was defend herself against a neighbor's petty, unfounded grievance. The process of preparing her defense, however ridiculous the premise, became an all-consuming obsession. Sleep became elusive, her mind replaying Mrs. Albright's sneering face, her clipped pronouncements of damage. The joy of the pool had evaporated, replaced by a constant thrum of anxiety. Every time she looked at the clear blue water, she saw not relaxation, but the potential for legal entanglements, the threat of financial ruin from an irrational grudge. Her. The judge's laugh was a seismic event in the quiet courtroom. It wasn't a polite snicker or a stifled cough of amusement. It was a full-bodied, rich, unrestrained sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the sterile room. It echoed, bouncing off the polished wood and the stern portraits on the wall, a raw, human sound of pure, unbridled incredulity. Brenda Albright, caught in the sound's full blast, stood frozen at the podium, her perfectly coiffed hair and starched suit suddenly looking ridiculous, out of place. The triumphant smirk she had worn for months crumbled, replaced by a mask of stunned humiliation. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted around the room as if searching for a hidden camera, a prank she wasn't in on. But there was only the judge, his face still red with mirth, and Alex, watching from the defendant's table, a wave of stunned relief washing over her. "Please, Mrs. Albright," the judge said, wiping a tear of laughter from his eye, his voice still choked with amusement. "I have seen many things in this courtroom. Disputes over property lines, disputes over noisy dogs, even disputes over rogue lawn flamingos. But a lawsuit over chlorinated infiltration from a child's backyard cannonball is a new one for the books." He took a moment to compose himself, his expression slowly returning to a more sober, though still faintly amused, demeanor. "This court finds your claim to be without merit, completely, utterly, and entirely without merit." Brenda Albright's face twisted. "Your Honor, this is a travesty. My evidence, the photographs—" "Your evidence," the judge interjected, his voice firm now, the laughter gone, "is of a damp fence on a summer day. A fence, I might add, that is designed to withstand far more moisture than a few splashes of pool water. I will not dignify this case with a trial. The case of Albright versus Vance is hereby dismissed with prejudice. Ms. Vance, you are free to go." The gavel came down with a sharp, decisive crack. For a moment, the world felt still. The dismissal with prejudice meant that Mrs. Albright couldn't refile the same lawsuit. It was over. The knot of anxiety that had been coiled in Alex's stomach for weeks began to unravel. She looked at the judge, a man who just moments ago had seemed like an impersonal, unassailable figure, and now looked like a savior. She gave him a small, heartfelt smile of gratitude. He returned a knowing nod. Brenda Albright, however, did not move. Her mouth was a thin line, her eyes fixed on Alex with a look of pure, concentrated hatred. The bailiff, sensing the tension, approached her. "Ma'am, Court is adjourned. You need to exit. She finally moved, gathering her now useless binder, her movements stiff and jerky, like a wind-up doll whose spring had just snapped. Alex, wanting nothing more than to escape this circus and breathe the fresh air of freedom, gathered her own papers and headed for the exit. She didn't get far. Just outside the courtroom doors, in the long, echoing hallway, Brenda Albright was waiting. She was no longer composed, no longer the starched napkin figure from before. Her face was flushed with fury, her hands trembling as they clutched the binder. "You think this is over?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous, a stark contrast to her courtroom performance. "You think that little performance was justice? He laughed at me. At me. My reputation. My good name." Alex held up her hands, a reflex. "Mrs. Albright, there was no damage. The judge agreed. It was a few drops of water. This was never a real legal case, and you know it." "Don't you dare lecture me on what's real," Brenda snarled, taking a step closer, her eyes blazing with a dangerous, unhinged light. "That fence is a symbol of my family's legacy in this neighborhood, and you, with your hedonistic splash parties, you tainted it. You think that judge can make it all go away with a laugh? He has no idea what you've truly done, the E." Words were so unhinged, so divorced from reality, that a chilling sense of unease crept through Alex. This wasn't just about the lawsuit anymore. It was personal. This was a woman who felt deeply, profoundly wronged, not by a lawsuit's outcome, but by the public mockery of her perceived suffering. "I won't forget this, Alexandra," she whispered, leaning in, her face so close Alex could smell the faint scent of lavender from her cardigan. "You can't hide behind a judge. The true consequences of your actions, they have yet to unfold. You'll see." With that final, ominous promise, Brenda Albright turned on her heel and stalked away, her footsteps echoing down the long, empty hall, leaving Alex with a cold knot in the pit of her stomach. The victory she had just won felt hollow, tainted by the new, more insidious threat hanging in the air. The lawsuit was over, but the war, it seemed, had just begun. For the next few weeks, the tension in the neighborhood was a palpable thing. It was in the way Mrs. Albright's curtains would twitch as Alex drove by. It was in the way she would suddenly disappear from her garden when Alex stepped outside. The passive aggression of the past was now an active, watchful malevolence. Then came the first of the incidents. Alex was on a client call finalizing the plans for a new garden when her doorbell rang. It was the mailman, looking perplexed. "Sorry to bother you, ma'am, but a neighbor of yours just handed me this and told me to deliver it to you personally." He held out a small cardboard box. Alex took it, confused. It was unmarked. She thanked him and went inside, her call forgotten. She opened the box. Inside, neatly arranged, were two items: a pristine, brand-new roll of wooden fence sealant and a small, antique silver thimble. A single, small note was tucked between them. It was written in the same precise, elegant script as the original summons. "A thimble for your small mind. A gift for your damaged fence. Now you have no excuse." Alex stared at the items, her blood running cold. The symbolism was clear. The thimble was a petty, vicious insult, mocking her for her supposedly small intellect. The sealant was a twisted joke, a direct reference to her offer to fix the fence, now presented with a grotesque irony. It was a message delivered right to her door, a reminder that she was being watched, that the defeat in court had only sharpened Brenda's malice, not dulled it. She tried to laugh it off, to tell herself it was just a strange, harmless act. But the feeling of being watched, of someone so obsessed with her that they would take the time to orchestrate such a bizarre display, was deeply unsettling. The incidents began to escalate. A week later, Alex was loading groceries into her car when she noticed something off. The latch on her side gate, which she always kept locked, was unfastened. Her heart pounded as she pushed it open. Nothing seemed to be missing, but scattered on her pristine lawn were several handfuls of what looked like shredded paper. As she got closer, she saw they were printouts, torn-up copies of her professional portfolio, her landscape designs, the ones she had presented to clients. Mrs. Albright must have somehow gotten her hands on them, shredded them, and then tossed them over the fence, a silent act of sabotage. Alex had no proof. She hadn't seen anything. But she knew. The feeling of violation was overwhelming. Her yard, her sanctuary, now felt like a stage for a secret, unhinged drama. She installed security cameras, but the fear of what Brenda might do next, of how she might find a way around the surveillance, was ever present. Her pool, once a source of joy, now seemed like a monument to her conflict with a deranged neighbor. She avoided it, letting the water sit still and silent, a constant reminder of the lawsuit it had inspired. The final straw came a month later. Alex was in the middle of a complex landscape design for a major client, the work a welcome distraction from her home life. The client was a well-known local art gallery, a prestigious project that could launch her career to the next level. She had poured hundreds of hours into the blueprints, the plant selections, the intricate lighting designs. The contract was set to be signed the following Monday. On Friday afternoon, she received an email from the gallery owner's assistant, a short, terse message. "Dear Ms. Vance, we have received some concerning information regarding your professional conduct. We are putting our contract on hold pending further review. We will be in touch." Alex's stomach dropped. She replied immediately, asking for clarification, but received no response. Over the weekend, the silence was agonizing. Her mind raced, replaying every interaction, every detail of the project. She couldn't think of a single thing she had done wrong. On Monday morning, she received a longer email from the gallery owner herself. It was formal, cold. It referenced several anonymous letters they had received, claiming Alex was a litigious, unreliable professional who frequently engaged in frivolous lawsuits and whose work often caused nuisance and property damage to her neighbors. It even mentioned a specific claim about her pool. The blood drained from Alex's face. The word lawsuit, the reference to her pool. There was only one person on the planet who would write such a thing, who had the unhinged obsession to track down her client and file such a malicious, targeted report. Brenda Albright had gone from complaining about a fence to actively trying to destroy Alex's livelihood. The stakes had just become immeasurably higher. This wasn't a petty neighborly dispute anymore. This was a cold, calculated act of professional assassination. Brenda Albright had crossed a line she could never uncross, weaponizing her madness and targeting the very thing that defined Alex: her work, her passion, her career. Alex stared at the email, the words blurring on the screen. The fear she had felt before was now replaced by the rage that coursed through Alex was a cold, pure thing, not the hot, blinding fury she had expected. It was a clarity born of a final, irreversible violation. The email from the gallery owner, with its damning, anonymous accusations, was not just a professional setback. It was a testament to how far Brenda Albright was willing to go. She hadn't just sued Alex's property. She had attacked her purpose, her identity as a creator, a person who built beautiful things from the earth. The fear was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. Alex had been a defender, a reactive force trying to reason with an unreasonable person. Now, she would be an architect of her own justice. She sat in her quiet study for a long time, the glow of the computer screen illuminating her face, every muscle in her body tense with a new kind of energy. Her mind, which usually worked in gradients of green and brown, in the soft curves of a winding path or the precise angles of a stone wall, was now calculating in black and white, in strategies and countermoves. This was a psychological war, And Brenda Albright had just shown her hand. Alex's first move was to try and salvage what she could. She drafted a careful, concise email to the gallery owner, laying out the timeline of the lawsuit and its absurd premise, explaining the dismissal, and offering to provide any documentation needed to prove her professional integrity. She was professional, reasonable, and direct. The response, however, was as cold and final as a gravestone. The gallery owner thanked her for the explanation, but stated that the nature of the allegations had created an uncomfortable atmosphere for all parties involved, and they would be moving on. The contract was officially terminated. The full weight of the loss hit Alex then, not with a crash, but a sickening thud. Thousands of dollars, months of work, and a career-defining opportunity all gone. The injustice of it was a bitter taste in her mouth, but it didn't break her. It solidified her resolve. Brenda wanted to fight dirty? Alex would meet her on her own terms, and she would win. Alex's new plan had nothing to do with judges or legal systems. It had to do with what really mattered to Brenda Albright. Her pristine reputation, her standing in the neighborhood, her meticulously crafted image of a pillar of the community. Brenda thrived on control and the quiet admiration of her peers. Alex would use that against her. She would expose Brenda's true nature, not with a roar, but with 1,000 tiny cuts. Her first act was to upgrade her security system. She didn't just add a few cameras, she installed a comprehensive high-definition surveillance network that covered every inch of her yard, every approach to her house, and, most importantly, the shared fence line. The cameras were small and discreet, almost invisible against the eaves and the foliage, a hidden, all-seeing eye. Then she began to document. She bought a new binder just like Brenda's, but hers would be a true record of events, not a work of fiction. She began a diary of every interaction, every instance of bizarre behavior. The date and time of the thimble delivery. The approximate time she found the shredded documents. The moment she received the email from the gallery. She was no longer just the victim. She was a meticulous archivist, a collector of evidence, building a case not for a court of law, but for a court of public opinion. The silence from Brenda's house was deafening in the days that followed. It was the silence of a predator who believed its prey was cowed, defeated. But Alex was no longer prey. She was waiting, watching. She knew Brenda wouldn't be able to stay away, that her pathological need for control and malice would eventually compel her to act again. Her patience was rewarded a week later. It was a Tuesday evening, just after dusk. Alex was sitting on her patio, ostensibly reading a book, but her eyes were subtly scanning her newly installed surveillance app on her phone. The screen displayed a live, multi-angle view of her yard. The little green light in her peripheral vision glowed as a motion sensor was triggered near the shared fence line. Alex didn't move. She held her breath, watching the grainy night vision footage. A figure emerged from the darkness of Brenda's yard. It was her, clad in a dark cardigan, her movements furtive and jerky. In her hand, she held a large black trash bag. She crept along the fence line, a dark silhouette against the moonlit yard. Alex watched, a grim satisfaction settling in her gut, as Brenda crouched down, her movements a mix of paranoia and practiced stealth. She then reached through a small gap between the fence posts, a spot where Alex's garden hedge had thinned, and began to painstakingly untie the garbage bag, pulling out small, dark objects. On the live feed, the objects looked like small, dark pellets. Alex's mind raced. What was she putting in her yard? Was it trash? Poison? She zoomed in on the image, the picture becoming a pixelated mess, but she could just make out a glint of something plastic? Brenda worked for a full 5 minutes, meticulously scattering the contents of the bag along the flower bed that ran, parallel to the fence. The entire time, Alex was silent, watching her, recording her, documenting every single motion. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. This was calculated, planned. When Brenda finally finished, she quickly tied the bag back up and retreated into the darkness, disappearing as silently as she had come. Alex sat for a full 10 minutes, letting the victory sink in. She had her. She had her dead to rights, caught in the act. But she couldn't just confront her with the footage. That would be too easy. Brenda would deny it, and the neighbors would still see it as a he said, she said dispute. Alex needed to use this to expose Brenda for who she really was, to prove her malice in a way that left no room for doubt. The next morning, Alex walked outside with a mug of coffee and a pair of gardening gloves, her cameras still recording. She walked to the flower bed and knelt down, pretending to inspect her plants. She moved a few leaves aside and found them, dozens of small, plastic, multicolored dog training clickers scattered amongst her begonias and petunias. They were the kind with a small button that made a sharp, high-pitched click sound. It was an utterly bizarre, completely absurd act of sabotage. It was not a grand gesture, not a serious threat. It was something only a truly deranged person would do, and it was exactly what Alex needed. She didn't clean them up. She left them there, scattered like tiny plastic landmines. She went about, her day as if nothing was wrong. She watered her flowers, she did some weeding, she even hummed to herself. That afternoon, she saw the Petersons, a couple from 2 houses down, walking their small beagle, Barnaby. The Petersons were polite, but kept to themselves. Their dog, however, was a well-known neighborhood character, notorious for his loud, high-pitched yelps whenever he saw another dog or a particularly interesting squirrel. Alex had been waiting for this. She took a deep breath, composed herself, and walked to her front lawn. "Oh, hello, Susan, Mark, Barnaby," she called out, a friendly wave on her face. Susan waved back. "Hello, Alex. What a lovely day." "It is. Just been doing some gardening," Alex said, with a light, easy tone. "Came across the strangest thing. Look at this." She walked them over to the side of her house, near the fence line, and pointed down at the flower bed. The Petersons peered over, curious. Susan knelt down. "What on earth—" "Right? I have no idea how these got here," Alex said, feigning an expression of bemused confusion. She reached down and picked one up, clicking it. The loud, sharp sound rang out in the quiet afternoon air. Immediately, Barnaby, who had been sniffing a nearby bush, stopped dead, his ears twitching. He looked in their direction, a look of utter bewilderment on his face. "Poor guy," Alex said, clicking. "Another one." Click, click. Barnaby let out a confused, frustrated yelp. The Petersons looked at each other, their faces a mix of confusion and mild annoyance. "It's the strangest thing," Alex said again, letting her voice trail off, hinting at the absurdity without having to spell it out. "All of these were just scattered here. Looks like someone was having a strange time with dog training." The subtle hint was all that was needed. She hadn't accused anyone. She hadn't even mentioned the fence. She had simply presented the absurdity and let the neighbors draw their own conclusions. The very next day, a small white plastic dog poop bag appeared on Alex's front lawn. It was a clear escalation, a vicious, disgusting response to Alex's subtle power play. But Alex didn't react. She let it sit there. And that night, she saw Mrs. Albright, her curtains pulled back just a few inches, watching, waiting for her reaction. The next morning, Alex's security camera, the one aimed at the front of her house, triggered. She opened the feed to find a wide-angle shot of her front lawn, and a few moments later, a figure walked into view. It was Mark Peterson, walking his dog. Barnaby, being a dog, trotted up to the plastic bag and sniffed at it. Mark stopped, sighed, and bent down to pick it up. As he did, he glanced up at Mrs. Albright's house, a fleeting but undeniable look of suspicion on his face. He then picked up the bag, turned, and walked directly to Brenda Albright's trash can, lifting the lid and dropping it in, his action a silent, damning accusation. Brenda's curtain twitched wildly, then fell back into place. For the first time in their war, she had not only been caught, but her spiteful act had been turned against her, exposing her malice not to a judge, but to a neighbor whose dog she had been tormenting. The hunter had become the hunted, and the look on Mark Peterson's face was a judgment far more chilly. The shock on Brenda Albright's face was a masterpiece of horrified indignation. From behind her thinly parted curtains, she had watched her humiliation unfold in broad daylight. The sight of Mark Peterson, a man she considered a respectable, if uninspired, member of the community, picking up a piece of dog waste, her handiwork, and depositing it with a look of pure disgust into her own trash can, was a silent, damning indictment. It was a rejection not just of her petty act, but of her very persona. Her carefully curated image had been tainted. She pulled back from the window as if she had been slapped, a furious flush spreading across her neck and cheeks. The judges. Laughter had been a public spectacle, but this was a personal attack, a betrayal by her own neighbors. For the next few days, a suffocating silence hung over the two properties. Brenda's garden, usually a hive of meticulous activity, was eerily still. Her car remained in the driveway. Alex, watching the live feeds from her security cameras, saw nothing but stillness. It was the silence of a wounded animal, licking its wounds, but Alex knew better. This wasn't a retreat, it was a recalculation, a quiet before the inevitable, more violent storm. The silence broke on a Friday evening. Alex had just returned from a long day of client consultations. She unlocked her front door and was hit by the scent of something foul, something cloying, and sickly sweet. She flipped on the lights and saw it. Every single window in her house, from the front door to the sliding glass door leading to her patio, had been meticulously smeared with a thick, syrupy substance. It was a dark, molasses-like mess that caught the light, filled with a glittery, unnatural shimmer. Alex's stomach turned as she realized what it was. Her prized, expensive organic fertilizer, the one she had developed herself for a specific client, a secret blend of seaweed and molasses that was the envy of other landscapers. It had been poured all over her windows, mixed with glitter, creating a viscous, nauseating mural of spite. Alex stepped back, her mind reeling. This was no longer petty harassment. This was full-blown, intentional vandalism. The smell was overpowering. The cleanup would be a nightmare, and the meaning was clear. Brenda had just told her, in the most disgusting way possible, that she would stop at nothing. She called the police. An officer came, took a report, and shook his head. "Ma'am, without definitive proof, this is still a civil matter, and even with proof, it's a misdemeanor. The cost of a good window cleaner is probably less than the legal fees." The words were a sobering reminder that the system, which had so easily laughed away Brenda's first claim, was just as powerless to deal with her madness. The incident was just the beginning of Brenda's recklessness. The next week, Alex found her. Garden hose had been deliberately, meticulously sliced in a dozen places. The week after that, her mailbox was stuffed with dozens of junk mail pamphlets, all neatly stamped with a single aggressive "no trespassing" stamp, a grotesque inversion of their original purpose. But the most chilling act came the following Saturday. Alex was sketching in her study, trying to focus on a new design. Her security camera app, which she now kept open on her desktop at all times, pinged with a motion alert. This time, the motion wasn't near the fence, but in a different corner of her yard. The camera aimed at her pool's pump and filtration system. Alex leaned closer to the screen, her heart pounding. The footage was clear, thanks to the motion-activated spotlight she had installed. Brenda, in a dark tracksuit and gloves, was hunched over the pump housing. Her movements were frantic, desperate, no longer the composed, stealthy figure of the past. She was using a large pair of bolt cutters, Alex watched, horrified, as Brenda worked at the pipes, the cutting sound muffled by the plastic housing, but visible in the jerky motion of her shoulders. She was trying to sever the lines, to sabotage the entire filtration system, a piece of equipment that cost thousands of dollars to replace. The act was so brazen, so filled with a cold, destructive rage that it took Alex's breath away. Alex's mind raced. Calling the police wouldn't get them there in time. This was her chance. This was the irrefutable evidence she needed. She took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. She started a new live recording on her phone. She would not only have the security footage, but a real-time recording of her witnessing the crime, time-stamped and undeniable. Just as she started the recording, Brenda succeeded. The last pipe gave way, and a spurt of water shot out, hitting her in the face. She cursed under her breath, a guttural sound of pure frustration, and then, satisfied, she backed away, her bolt cutters clutched in her hand. She retreated back into the darkness, leaving a small geysering fountain behind her, a monument to her unhinged fury. Alex stood up, her legs wobbly. She looked at the timestamp on her phone, 9:02 p.m. The footage was pristine. It showed the entire act, from beginning to end. She had Brenda, not on a legal technicality, not on an absurd claim, but on a clear, undeniable act of criminal malice. The psychological war was over. The physical war was over. A strange calm settled over Alex as she watched the fountain of water spray into the night air. The final, powerful beat came not from a dramatic confrontation, but from the simple, cold reality of the video file on her phone. Brenda Albright had been caught. The curtain on her life of careful appearances was about to be pulled back, not by a snarky neighbor or a laughing judge, but by the irrefutable evidence of a crime she had committed in the dark, thinking no one was watching. The justice that had so briefly escaped them both was now just a matter of a single click. The air was cold, but a different kind of cold than the chill of the night. It was the clinical chill of righteous certainty. Alex stood in her kitchen, her phone clutched in her hand, the video file of Brenda Albright's deliberate vandalism, a single, unassailable truth in a world that had been filled with her neighbor's lies. The geysering water from the severed pipes, a monument to Brenda's unhinged malice, was still spraying into the night, but Alex didn't move to fix it. That water was evidence. It was a witness to a crime. She didn't wait. She grabbed her keys and drove straight to the police station. This time there was no hesitation, no doubt, and no shame in her voice as she explained her purpose. She was no longer a civilian reporting a nuisance. She was a victim of a crime with irrefutable proof. The officer at the front desk was a different man. His expression initially one of weary skepticism as she began her story about a neighborly dispute. But as Alex pulled up the video on her phone, as he watched the clear, time-stamped footage of Brenda Albright in her dark tracksuit, her face illuminated by the spotlight, her gloved hands wielding bolt cutters to saw through the pool pipes, his expression changed. The skepticism fell away, replaced by a grim, professional seriousness. He took down the information, got her statement, and made a call. The next morning, 2 police cars pulled up to the shared curb. The one in front was the officer from the previous night, and behind him was a patrol car with an officer and a detective. Alex met them on her lawn, pointing to the damaged pipes, the small fountain still spurting water, a silent testament to the act. The detective walked over to the shared fence line and glanced over into Brenda's yard. He then walked back to his car, pulled out his radio, and spoke into it. "Dispatch, we have visual confirmation of the damage at 1420 Elmwood. Proceeding to detain the individual at 1422 Elmwood for questioning." Alex's heart began to pound in her chest, not with fear, but with an immense, powerful sense of finality. This was it. The end of the line. The officers walked up to Brenda Albright's front door and knocked. A long moment passed before Brenda opened it. She was in a pale blue dressing gown, her hair in rollers. She looked disheveled, as if she had just woken up, her face a mask of feigned confusion and irritation. "Officers, is there a problem?" she asked, her voice a practiced mixture of prim civility and barely concealed annoyance. "Mrs. Albright," the detective said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "We're investigating a report of vandalism. We have reason to believe you have information about the damage to your neighbor's pool filtration system." Brenda's composure faltered for a brief, telling second. Her eyes darted from the officers to Alex, standing on her lawn, and then back again. Her face, which had been a mask of feigned innocence, hardened. "Vandalism? I have no idea what you're talking about. I've been in my house all night, and frankly, my neighbor is a nuisance. I'm not surprised she would make up something like this." The detective, however, didn't even flinch at her familiar brand of dismissal. "Mrs. Albright, we have footage of the incident from last night at approximately 9:02 p.m. He said the timestamp slowly and deliberately. "You're clearly visible with a pair of bolt cutters." The statement hit her like a physical blow. Brenda's carefully constructed world of lies and self-righteous indignation shattered. Her eyes went wide with a raw, desperate fear. The color drained from her face. She looked from the detective to Alex, then to the silent video camera on Alex's house, its small red recording light invisible to the naked eye. Her breath hitched in her throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. The veil of control she had so desperately clung to had been ripped away, not by a flimsy lie, but by the cold, impartial lens of technology. This is an outrage," she sputtered, her voice no longer clipped and calm, but a trembling shriek. "This is harassment. I would never—" Her protestations were useless. The officers didn't bother to argue. They simply informed her of her rights and escorted her out, a small, humiliated figure in her bathrobe and rollers, her pristine reputation now a public scandal. As they led her past her front lawn, she caught Alex's eye. The hatred was still there, but it was now laced with a bitter, defeated shame. Alex simply met her gaze, a small, serene smile on her face. Brenda's world had crumbled not because of a lawsuit, but because she had, in her madness, given her a way to prove who she truly was. The irony was a kind of justice all its own. In the days that followed, the story rippled through the neighborhood. The Petersons, the couple with the beagle, stopped by with a sincere apology, ashamed they had ever given Brenda the benefit of the doubt. Other neighbors, who had watched her from a distance for years, shared quiet stories of her bizarre, litigious nature. The legend of the chlorinated infiltration lawsuit spread, a cautionary tale of a woman whose pettiness had escalated into a crime. The police report was filed, the charges were laid, and the threat of a full-scale legal battle loomed over Brenda's head. Alex didn't follow up with the case. She didn't need to. The justice had already been served. Brenda's reputation, the one thing she truly cared about, was in tatters, exposed for what it was, a facade built on malice and control. Weeks later, the weather had turned, and the leaves were beginning to shift to amber and crimson. Alex stood in her backyard, watching a small crew of landscapers fix her broken pipes, the gushing water now a distant memory. A few days later, a pool specialist came and drained the pool, cleaned it, and refilled it, the water once again a serene, perfect blue. The fence stood between the two properties, its planks weathered by years of sun and rain, a silent partition between two different worlds. One afternoon, Alex found herself in her poolside chair, just as she had been on that fateful day months ago. The air was cool and crisp, but the sun was warm on her skin. She had a new client, a far more grounded and normal one, and her career was back on track. A small, contented sigh escaped her lips. Suddenly, a splash echoed from the water, and her two nieces, Lily and Chloe, surfaced, their hair dripping, their faces beaming with joy. A few drops of water arced through the air, hitting the fence. Alex watched them, a profound sense of peace settling over her. She knew that on the other side of that fence, a woman was now living a life of public shame, a prisoner of her own malice. But Alex was free. The fence was no longer a battle line. It was just a fence, and the pool was once again what it was always meant to be, a sanctuary of pure, unburdened joy.